Welcome to Getting Defensive Thursday edition, presented by Gridiron Ratings. Your path to the title starts. Gridiron Ratings. I'm your host, JJ Wenner. You can find me on Twitter at JJ Wenner. And tonight we look at the latest news and injuries and review Tripp start sit advice. Now, joining me is our returning champion. You can find him on Twitter at Dynasty Tripp. Tripp, what is going on, brother?
It's a good day. We got football on and a champion with no loser tonight. So,
all right, yeah. Did you see Saquon Barkley had a nice run, but Chase Young was keeping up with him step for step.
That guy's a monster, man. Holy cow!
Oof, that is a scary, scary man. Now, before we kick off, remember to subscribe below for a chance to win the Gridiron Ratings Playbook, the only resource you need for all of your fantasy leagues. We will draw one winner for every 25 new subscribers, so be sure to hit the subscribe button below. Now, Tripp, let's get right into the news. Dre Greenlaw is having surgery and is now expected to miss up to 8 weeks. Yikes. Is Aziz Al-Shayr worth an ad in IDP leagues?
Oh, yeah. It's a good spot start for everybody who needs an LB. And LB is an interesting position already. Lots of dudes we thought might be full-time aren't full-time, and lots of dudes that other folks thought would be full-time aren't full-time either. So there's a lot of cut candidates and a lot of room for add-on rosters right now. So, yeah, I'm interested to see if Aziz Al-Shayr gets full-time the whole time. I mean, there's, I could see a little bit of risk with Marcel Harris coming in there and as a dime backer situation. But, yeah, you got to add a guy like that if you're in a full IDP league where you're looking to start 3 or 4 linebackers.
Yeah, absolutely, especially when somebody's out for that length of time.
Yeah.
Next injury, Demarcus Lawrence, also out for 6 to 8 weeks with a broken foot.
Yeah, man.
Now, I did watch Dr. Chow's tweet. He did a video. He said that he might be out a bit longer because of his position and the chance that it may be a refracture of the same injury, an earlier injury.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a replacement on the roster right now with Randy Gregory also out with COVID?
There really isn't, man. Demarcus Lawrence is just such a good player, and he's so underrated. I think that people lose sight of how good he is because each of the last 2 years he started the season slow because he's been banged up. 1 year he had surgery in the spring and took a while to get up to speed, and then last year he somehow was banged up again, and he was great after he got out there. But people forget that he's so good because he's on a bad defense. But man, is he a good player. And you didn't really see it. You didn't really see big numbers in week 1 because they played Brady and the Bucs, and Brady and the Bucs offense was, clicking on all cylinders. But man, he's such a good player. And, I guess what we're looking at is rotation in Dallas, where we got Doris Armstrong out there and Terrell Basham, which, that's not very exciting. The guy that I'm taking a shot at is Doris Armstrong. He's a guy that's a younger guy. I mean, I guess he's in year 4 now. It feels like he's young. I'm a Cowboys fan, so I'm constantly hoping the guys eventually pop, So maybe this is Doris Armstrong's year, but if there's a guy, I mean, he fits into the designated pass rusher role in Gus Bradley's defense. I mean, Dan Quinn, same difference. Well, actually, Gus Bradley's defense looked all right the other night. Dan Quinn's not so much. So, but anyhow, Doris Armstrong is the guy you take a shot on in a super deep league where anything can happen and see what you get out of it.
Well, we're talking more about injuries. There's so many. Darius Leonard missed some practice time last week. He's missing some practice time again. Is there any concern in your eyes, or is this just a team resting their stars?
Anytime you got a guy resting on, not playing on Wednesday, not practicing on Wednesday, and if he's back out there on Thursday, I haven't seen if he's back out there on Thursday, but assuming he is, then he's fine. You just don't sweat that. It becomes load management, right? We're going to see more of that. We got the NBA talks about load management, and the friggin' networks get upset. We're not going to see load management in the terms of guys missing games in the NFL, but we're going to see more missed practices. We have to. It's just the season is so long anymore.
Yeah, it's that 17th game adds a lot of extra reps when you think of practice and everything else that goes into it. So I definitely agree. Guys are going to be taking some time off during the week. Now, before we move on, there was a question on Twitter, and I wanted to check with you on it. Chris Conley asked, would you trade Justin Simmons and Tremaine Edmonds for Jamal Adams? Now, His other linebackers are Roquan, Kenny Young, Christian Kirksey, and Logan Wilson. His only other safety is Derwin James.
Yeah, I kind of like that. It's a little early to be consolidating assets like that, but I also don't know how deep that league is. If it's less than 11 starters, that's absolutely a slam dunk, because if you're able to trade into premium assets, I mean, the other guys you mentioned are guys that are replaceable if you're playing 6 or 9 starters. If you got 11 starters, then depth at this point in the season is worth something that you think about a little bit more. But I like that trade. You go ahead and get that stud asset in there. It sounds like the guy's defense is absolutely loaded if he's got Derwin and Jamal in the back, and then the linebackers you mentioned in the front, he's got a couple of hits there with guys like Logan Wilson that people are not paying up for when they should be, and so he's in a great spot.
Fantastic. Now, Tripp, before we get to the main topic tonight, I am thoroughly impressed on a weekly basis with your knowledge of defensive players. So before we discuss who to start and who to sit this week, I want to test how good you are. I'm going to give you 4 questions on 5 cornerbacks in the NFL based on their week 1 stats. All right?
Yes,
Are you
sir.
ready?
I'm ready.
Here we go. It's not the late round QB or the host of this stream. I led all cornerbacks with 8 solo tackles. Who am I?
Oh my gosh, somebody had 8 solos. I looked at there. I saw there were like 3 dudes that had 9. I know Jalen Ramsey was one of them. I'll have to say him because that's my best guess right now.
I gave you a clue. JJ, Janoris Jenkins.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, he's covering Nuke Hopkins and just getting gobbled up. I forgot about that.
All right. 0 for 1. Oh, I'm disappointed right off the bat. Let's be honest. Number 2, I'm not Ferris's buddy, but he'd volunteer this info. I led all cornerbacks with 2 tackles for loss. Who am I?
Oh, my gosh. I just saw this, too. Oh, gosh.
I'll give you the first part because that's the clue. Not Ferris's buddy, but he'd volunteer this info.
Somebody went to Tennessee? I can't think of a freaking quarterback that went to Tennessee. That's terrible.
Yeah, they're not putting a lot of people in the NFL. Your favorite Steeler?
Cam Sutton?
I
should have guessed, of course. That's the thing. Cam Sutton, Kenny Moore, the 2 guys that have the lowest depth of tackle in the entire league. I should have just gone back to what I knew on that one. I didn't know that Cam Sutton went to Tennessee. That's crazy. I should have known, freaking Hollywood, Darrell Winstead. I'm surprised that he hasn't been trumpeting that more, because that's something I would have picked up on if he had.
All right, question number 3. Despite our draft capital, we did something novel. We led all rookie cornerbacks in total tackles and play for the same team. Who are we?
2 guys on the same team leading rookie tackles. Oh, my gosh.
2 rookie cornerbacks who led the league in tackles. 4 rookies.
Yeah, for rookies. Oh, gosh. This is going to be awful, man.
Listen, these are hard questions. I would be a fan of these 2 gentlemen, by the way.
Okay. Well, of course. Yeah, we got the team that is starting a no-name defense there in a serious way. Is Eccles a rookie?
Yes, Brandon Eccles and Michael Carter.
Michael Carter. Oh, you calling him a corner? Okay.
The
I
other
was thinking
one.
him of a safety. Yeah.
That's my fault. He was listed as a corner on, I believe, Pro Football Focus.
Yeah. Well, he might have played corner, right? I mean, who knows what they're mixing and matching out there. He was. I think he was announced as a safety, but yeah, they could easily be playing him at corner. They got nobody to throw out there.
Nobody. All right, final one, and this is the hardest. This recent Duck found a home in the Bay and posted 90 snaps to lead the position.
Diamador Lenore. Is that right?
No effing way. Yes.
It's a memorable name. I mean, if your name was Diamador Lenore, you're all with a gold chain and a massive strut.
I was just going to say, move over Lil Jordan Humphrey, because JJ's got a new favorite name in the NFL. That's right. And it's Diamador Lenore. All right. Well, that was for all of our cornerback leagues. Pay attention. Those are some players you want to keep an eye on moving forward. Now, Tripp, it's time to get to the meat and potatoes of this episode, which are start, sit decisions. Now, The Titans and Jets each gave up 6 sacks last week to opposing defenses and now face Seattle and New England, respectively. Which edges should we be starting from these teams? You can start with the Patriots.
Patriots, I'm liking the looks of you got Zach Wilson out there as the cornerback just getting eaten up by the Carolina Panthers pass rush last week. I got Matt Judon and Kyle Van Noy. Each were Van Noy had a sack against the Miami quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa. And you got Judon as a big high-priced free agent ad. I think that those guys they're in line to eat this week, and they're guys that aren't expensive. They're guys that if you're in a deep league, you're loading up on them. But I drafted those guys, I swear, outside of the top 60 or 70 linebackers in the leagues where it's conventional position, and it's not much different in the true position side. That's just money right there. Those guys are good players. They're guys that they're playing a lot of snaps and they're playing a good defense, and just that's a smash start there. If you're looking at your full IDP lineup and you're looking for a third or fourth linebacker or a third or fourth edge, I mean, those guys are easy starts. That's just that look good in my roster at that point.
Now in Seattle, it seems as though there is a little bit of a changing of the guard. Rasheem Green led the Seahawks edges with 53 snaps, a 70% share. Should he be trusted again against the Titans?
I'm in a couple spots where I have to trust him, which I'm not thrilled about it because I always go the cheap route of the defense. But it's high risk, right? I mean, you got Carlos Dunlap, the veteran. You got Kerry Hyder. They brought in another veteran on a free agent deal, and odds are that one of those two guys is going to lead the unit in snaps, but. With Rasheem Green, what he was able to do last week, and he's a younger guy that they've been developing for a while, and they're not hung up. The Seahawks aren't hung up on who's making what and who got drafted where. They're just going to put out the guy they think has the best chance to make an impact on the game. And I mean, Rasheem Green in a couple of the true position leagues I'm in has a defensive tackle designation. He's a smash starting that spot, getting all those edge snaps. So, and if he's in a conventional position league as a D end, I mean, he's still pretty attractive. Playing the matchup that he has. People have forgotten this, but Ryan Tannehill was getting stuffed week after week after week by edges. His first year as a starter in Tennessee, just getting eaten alive. And then somehow they seem to fix it over the last couple of years, and he hasn't been taking sacks at such a high rate. But he was getting just sacked left and right that first year. And people that play offense only aren't really paying attention to that, so they might not have noticed. But they might be back to that spot. Taylor Lewan took to Twitter and took responsibility for all the sacks that Chandler Jones got past him. But there's still some truth to the fact that a sack is a quarterback stat. And it makes me wonder with Arthur Smith being gone and, this offense might not be the same. And so if you're in a spot like I am where you've lost Demarcus Lawrence and you've lost Marcus Davenport and you need to start, you might roll out Rasheem Green.
Wait a second. What happened to Marcus Davenport?
Oh, he bruised a pec. He's out this week too.
I give up. I'm not playing fantasy anymore. I quit. I'm just hosting pods from now
More
on.
of attrition, man.
Wow. That's upsetting to me. Wow. Yeah, they did say that I was looking at the Titans offense, that they ran like 11% play action, whereas last year they were running at like 35% play action.
And what are they doing? I mean, that was their bread and butter.
It would only make sense that they go back to what they were doing. It seemed to work a lot better what they did last week.
Right.
All right. Reddit user CapDP asks, who is the better start for IDP right now? Christian Kirksey or Anthony Walker?
Oh, that's a tough one. I got to see who they're playing. That's that close. Like Kirksey, they're playing each other, of course. All right. Well, you got Kirksey facing the rushing attack with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. And then that's also going to be a tight end heavy offense, especially with Odell Beckham out for another week. So I like Kirksey in that spot, but I don't hate Walker. I mean, Walker's going to get the snaps and he's going to have his opportunities. But based on between those two choices, I'm rolling out Kirksey. That guy he's kind of a back from the dead in terms of dynasty values and in terms of he's going to be a starter for a while this year. So, I have him in a contract league where I paid way too much for him, and I was glad to see it resurrected in value.
That is always good when it pays off.
That's right.
The end. All right. Well, hey, let's move to the next matchup. Saints Panthers. Now, CMC is clearly the biggest threat for Carolina, but reports today were that Quan Alexander, Tano Passanyu, Marcus Davenport, and Pete Werner did not practice. Who are we starting in this matchup?
Man, I hadn't heard that Quan was missing practice. If he's in there, I like him because I think that he's not a full-time guy, but if he's out there chasing McCaffrey, man, that's attractive from an IDP standpoint. So I'm interested in that. Demario Davis is you just don't think about that. He's a starter if he's on your roster, but Quan is a guy that isn't normally a second starter for me that I would start if he's healthy. If he's not healthy, you just can't mess with it because you're looking at Zach Bond and you're looking at Randos, and you can't risk the downside in terms of the low snap counts that you get. But and on the edge side, I see guys picking up Tanoh Pass, and I'm not going to mess with that. Peyton Turner might be back healthy again, and I think Carl Granderson might still be there. It's just going to be a go to rodeo. They didn't have an answer at defensive tackle with David Onyemata on suspension either. It was just warm bodies out there. And Passanyu had like 900 snaps last year and 2 sacks or something. I was like, how do you invest in that guy? Just pass. Just start the guys Cam Jordan, Demario Davis, Malcolm Jenkins, and call it a night.
Now on the other side, the Panthers defense. They feasted on a weak offensive line last week against the Jets. So, you saw a lot from Brian Burns in the first half. Yetur Gross-Matos showed up. Who are we starting this week? New Orleans isn't as weak offensively as the Jets. So can we expect any of them to perform?
Well, it's interesting because you got an offense that we're still not sure what to make out of, right? Because the Packers just laid an egg. And so you think, all right, well, what is the Saints offense really about? What are its strengths? What we saw in the preseason was Marcus Callaway, and he didn't show. He was 1 for 14 in the first game. So, they threw a lot to the tight ends. Well, if you're throwing a lot to the tight ends, all of a sudden your linebackers are interesting and your strong safety. Well, your linebackers and your strong safety are already guys you're starting because you got Shaq Thompson and Jeremy Chin. You're starting them. Yep. And then you got Jermaine Carter, who's no one paying attention to. He's still available in deep leagues, and he played almost all the snaps last week. He's a guy that should have been added on waiver wires, and if you got him, if you added him, you probably need him, and you should go ahead and start him. He's in a good spot there. He's got to face Kamara. He's got to face Adam Troutman, who had like a 30% target share. He's got to face Juwan Johnson in the red zone, who had 2 touchdowns. So, yeah, all those are good starts there. All your Panthers, just maybe, load them up. You can't bet on the sack production that you had, but I think that with the tacklers, I think you absolutely have to load them up.
Yeah, you couldn't tell anything after that Green Bay game. I don't know who New Orleans is. I don't think they know at this point.
Right, exactly.
Until they face an opponent who shows up and decides they want to play a full 4 quarters.
Yeah, they thought they were vacationing at freaking St. Augustine or something like that. Maybe they are in Jacksonville playing a football game.
that was not pretty. Next matchup, Cincinnati versus Chicago. Now, these are 2 teams trying to turn their fortunes around. And there are 2 teams with terrible offensive lines. Who are we starting in this matchup?
Oh, I'm loving the defensive end there for Cincinnati. You got Trey Hendrickson. A lot of people are skeptical because of the production that he put up opposite Cam Jordan last year. He had an efficiency number which didn't make sense, and he got big money, and people are skeptical. The Bears' left tackle situation is such a train wreck. And Justin Hollins. Who is Justin Hollins, right? Justin Hollins had 2 sacks and 7 tackles playing on that same side of the edge for LA last week. You roll out Trey Hendrickson. You probably drafted him as your second or third end. You go ahead and roll him out there this year. That's awfully attractive. Then on the other side of the football, you had Cincinnati. You got Joe Burrow coming back with from a serious knee injury, and the interior pass rush from the Vikings got to Burrow. And you're not talking about stud pass rushers. You're talking about pocket crushers like Michael Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson. Those guys aren't out there to get up the field. Those guys are out there to push the O-lineman back into the quarterback, and they combined for 3 sacks. Akeem Hicks, I thought looked pretty good against the Rams. I thought he showed a little bit of burst. He's an older guy, of course, and I don't know how much he has left in the tank, but thought he looked okay. And the last time he played in this style of defense, keep in mind they hired Sean Desai, who's bringing a Fangio Staley style of defense there. He was awesome in that scheme. And so I'm giving Akeem Hicks another chance. I'm liking him to start for anybody who needs a second defensive interior player. I think he's a great start. He's probably a low end first for some folks. So I like him there. He's, of course, the DE designation in some of these conventional position leagues. But anytime he's got an interior designation or tackle designation, he's a solid start.
Now, Tripp, when you are looking at a matchup, how do you decide who you're going to start in a given week?
Well, for me, it's a tier-based process. Like I'm not, I might, like last week, I was looking at a roster where I had Cam Jordan and Khalil Mack and Demarcus Lawrence, and like all of them have crappy matchups. Well, it doesn't matter. They're all really good. You got to start them, and you just got to take your lumps if they don't get there. But I'm looking at pretty broad tiers, just a few within a position, and I'm thinking about, all right, now when I get down into that tier, when I get to that second or third tier. I look at the guys who are good prospects in my second edge defense. I'm looking at who they're playing against. As Greg Cosell always says, it's a matchup-based league. Do I have a guy that I think can win his matchup? And if I do, then I'm pretty interested in it, right? And so we're talking about Akeem Hicks with dealing with the interior of the Minnesota or the Cincinnati offensive line. And we're talking about Trey Hendrickson facing some dude off the street, for all we know, in Chicago's left tackle. Well, you know that Trey Hendrickson, being an NFL caliber player, is going to win matchups. And so you can't guarantee that that's a sack because he still has to get the quarterback, but you be pretty darn sure he's going to get pressures. And so I'm always focused on who their matchup is. And on the defensive line, there's two aspects. There's who's blocking them. And the second one is who they're trying to sack. Because there are some quarterbacks that they may have a terrible offensive line in front of them because of injury or what have you, but they're still not taking a lot of sacks because of getting rid of the ball. So there's two pieces of it. On the second and third levels, I'm looking at, well, who are they covering? And it's the same principle as cornerback streaming, right? So we talked about Jermaine Carter. Well, if you have the Saints who have next to nothing to throw the ball to on the boundary, well, they're going to focus on throwing the ball to the tight ends and the slot receiver possibly and the running back. And so you're looking at the players who cover those guys. And the players most likely to get tackles then are the guys who are covering the primary targets in the offense. And so that's where I'm looking on the linebackers and the safeties. And that's an indicator there. So, and the cornerbacks is the same. Anytime I'm looking at streaming a cornerback, I'm always looking at, who do Allen Robinson and Keenan Allen face? Because they're going to get 15 targets and they don't run away from anybody. So the man covering them is going to make the tackle.
That's a good point about older wide receivers. But so it's really, when it comes to IDP starters, you are chasing snap counts and the opportunities they have on the field, right? And that's completely tied together.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, it's funny you mentioned Justin Hollins, because Reddit user Infinite Number asked, is Justin Hollins a name to know or a 1 week wonder?
I don't think he's a 1 week wonder, but I'm also not banking on him as a name to know. He's an interesting guy, and I wrote him up a little bit in my waiver wire article over at DynastyFootballFactory.com. And he's so much like Leonard Floyd. Not a first-round pick, but is a guy who didn't really pan out at his first stop, which was Denver. I think he was a third-round pick, but he was with Brandon Staley in Denver, and Staley was the linebackers coach there under Fangio. And it's a guy that's stuck in Staley's mind as this is a guy that I can develop. And the Broncos decided that they couldn't develop him, just like the Bears decided that they couldn't develop Leonard Floyd. And Staley brought both of those guys to LA last year before he left this year and thought that both of those guys could be successful edges in the NFL. And a lot of their success in my mind is attributed to Aaron Donald. In fact, there was a play that the NBC, it was on NBC. They replayed it several times where Aaron Donald crushes the pocket, gets in there, flushes out Dalton, and Hollins finishes it up. Perfect example of how Hollins can be productive as an IDP. Hollins got credit for that sack. That was one of his 2 sacks. And it's the same thing as Floyd. So there are people out there chasing Floyd as their edge 2 or 3. Well, Hollins fits the same bill. I don't really think that Hollins is any less of maybe a little less of maybe, but I don't think it's a big margin between him and Floyd as to who's actually a better player. They're both out there playing 3/4 of the snaps, which is a slight surprise to me. I thought Terrell Lewis would get a little more of a run, but he's the third rusher out there. But between him and Floyd, I mean, those guys are basically interchangeable. They're just edges. They're playing in a defense, which is giving them opportunities by scheming up pressure, by playing outside of Aaron Donald. And I think it's pretty interesting if you you need an edge 3, and he's got a good matchup. I think they're playing the Colts this week, and we know that Carson Wentz is not seeing pressure well lately. I think that he's a good start this week against the Colts. The Colts left tackle situation is bad, and Hollins was playing on the right a good bit against Chicago. I go ahead and run him back out there and see if he can do it again.
Fantastic. Quick game update on the IDP side. We have Landon Collins leading the Giants with 4 tackles. Jonathan Allen has 2 sacks. On the other side for New York, we have Blake Martinez already with 6 total tackles. And the only sack on that side is rookie Aziz Al-Shayr again.
Nice.
2 weeks in a row with the sack, if I'm not mistaken, correct?
Yeah, he's a guy to keep up with, too, because they don't know what to make of their edge group. They brought in, they had Lorenzo Carter playing a bunch of snaps, and who knows if he's the answer. Then you got O'Shane Jimenez, and they brought in Fede Odenigbo, and I'm not sure, is he still on the team?
I thought he got cut. I don't.
He might have. Yeah. So they don't know what the answer is. The edge. So that's a place to get a free stash. So yeah, Al-Shayr is pretty interesting. He was a lot of folks thought he'd be a first round pick, and he slid to the second. That's good value there for the Giants because of injury. So that's a guy that I wouldn't mind having. He might be on the waiver wire article next week.
Well, I will tell you, in our big league that we're in together, the Premier League, I tried to trade up for a player in the draft, and I was at work, and I made all these moves to try to reach up and grab Dwayne Eskridge. When I finally made the final move, I realized I had counted incorrectly.
Oh, no.
And they were all gone.
Oh, crap.
So I took Aziz Al-Shayr instead. So I have to pretend that's what I made all those moves for. That's
right.
The second copy of a player.
Yeah, I know.
But yeah,
well, that worked out for you, and that MFL might switch over to true position next year. That might be a really good asset for you.
I'm hoping. And Dwayne Eskridge really hasn't done anything.
Yeah, I heard a story recently. A guy compared him to. I saw an article, good article, comparing him to the modern fullback. Not just Eskridge, but any of those guys, Jalen Guyton, Nico Hardman, all those guys. They're there to clear out the defense. You don't block them out of the way anymore. You run them out with speed. That's me who Eskridge is.
Yeah, Mecole Hardman. All right, last 2. After terrible week 1 showing against Philly, Atlanta travels to Tampa to take on the reigning champs. Now, will the Falcons be grounded this week? Who are we starting in this game?
Oh my gosh! Do you see all the press about the Atlanta offensive guards? They're practically ready to sign me up. They'll bring somebody up off the street. They seen a fat guy out there, man. They're in bad shape. And Ndamukong Suh's just got to be just freaking licking his chops, man. That's such a ridiculous plus matchup for him. He's just going to eat him up, man. I'd almost start him over some edges in like a DLLB DB setup, man. It's just poor Falcons. They looked good for about 2 drives. I watched that game, and then they just couldn't do anything. The Eagles figured out what they were doing. It was just all over.
Yeah, well, they finally the Eagles showed they could make a defensive adjustment.
Right? Yeah.
I didn't even know they could do that. Philly fans didn't know that either. That was bad. That was I don't know what happened there, but so is Sue the only person you're starting though?
Well, I got Carlton Davis too, because he's going to be seeing a good bit of Calvin Ridley, so that's attractive quarterback start there. But you start your guy. You start David and you start White because you got him. You got to play those guys. But and you start Shaq Barrett. Shaq Barrett's a premier edge rusher, so such a simple defense in that you have studs and then you have other guys, right? And the only one that's on the fringe there is whoever the strong safety is. If Jordan Whitehead's healthy, do you contemplate him? Probably not. You're playing Atlanta. I guess you could consider it because if you have Tampa, Atlanta, you got Kyle Pitts and Hayden Hurst out there. So the strong safety should be involved in coverage. But you're probably talking about low snap count because that's not an offense that was able to possess the ball very well. And I don't know. But yeah, it's really Sue is the guy that stands out as who you want to start. And everybody else, you don't really adjust upward or downward based on the matchup in my mind.
Awesome. Hey, Craig in our comments has a question. Who are you guys sitting out of Devin White, Devin Bush, and Isaiah Simmons? 14 team can only start 2.
Interesting. 14 team and only has 2. To me, that's pretty easy. I'm sitting Devin Bush, and the only reason why is because I'm worried about the snap counts. I think he has a good matchup. I think he could smash. The issue with because the difference is between him and Isaiah Simmons, right? Because White you obviously don't start White. I mean, right. You obviously don't sit White. That's just he's a starter. But Isaiah Simmons is a weird bird to me because he was out there with playing a good bit in the slot, and he's like this, kind of this. To use cliches, he's the guy that they're moving around a lot. And you like a guy that's just kind of parked in the box in order to optimize his tackle opportunities. And this was the risk with Simmons coming in last year is he really a full-time linebacker, or is he a part-time linebacker to part-time safety? And through week 1, I was surprised that he played full-time. I thought, I think most people thought that Zaven Collins would play full-time and that Hicks and Simmons would rotate. And do we know after 1 week that that's the plan for the whole season? I would argue no. I mean, it might be, but, it's probably odds are that they've shown what they want to do. But I still would not be just wholesale in after 1 week. So Simmons is a risk. But Bush is the bigger risk because we've just seen him not play a full complement of snaps. And we know that Schobert is wearing the dot, and he's the communicator on the defense, and he's new. If there's a good man that's likely to grow in snap count between the two of them, it's Schobert and not Bush. And so that would be my issue with starting Bush there. I mean, you can't go wrong. I would, neither of those are bad starts, obviously, but you're looking at really good starts versus good starts.
Yeah, those are not 3 bad guys to have to choose 2 from. I usually don't face that because of my draft decisions.
Yeah, I'm looking at Holcomb and Bostic and Singleton and Wilson and a bunch of junk. Exactly.
Yes. Any Falcons defenders?
Well, yeah, I mean, you got Deion Jones is looking good. I mean, you got to love Deion Jones. I saw some buzz on Twitter saying that Foye Oluokun was going to overtake him as the IDP asset in Atlanta. I was like, wow, that's a hot take. I like Deion Jones. I think he's a good player. He's a guy they're going to have. Both of them probably doing some running with Gronk out there, but Gronk had like 8 receptions for 90 yards there. I mean, blast from the past. I mean, if they're throwing a Gronk that much, then the linebackers will be in the business because they don't sit linebackers in Dean Pease's defense. They're always running 2 linebackers out there. So I think both of those guys get a lot of run. And Deion Jones especially I just think he's a good player. I'm starting to Oluokun too. Those are set it and forget it type players, both of them for me. And I don't know how many people know Foye Oluokun's name, but he's a guy that I don't hesitate to start. The only other one out there that you can think about is another interesting one. If you're in a super deep league, is Steven Means. He played almost 90% of the snaps as an edge defender for the Falcons. Now you can't start an edge defender against Tampa and Tom Brady very easily, but it's just a guy to keep an eye on. And then the last one that you watch is Grady Jared. And I was not shocked to see that he had 0 points in the week 1. And his deployment is different. In Dan Quinn's defense last year, he was a guy that was just get up the field every down and make a play. That's not his role in Dean Pease's defense. That's not what they ask their tackles to do. And it's going to limit his opportunities a little bit. He's going to have to play a little bit more conservatively as a rusher getting upfield. And I think that dampens his production a little bit. And so he's out there against Tampa, and it's the same issue where Tampa controls the pace of play, where it's hard to tackle Brady. And if you have an option other than Jarrett, you go with it. Now, you're talking a shallow league there because if you drafted Jarrett, you drafted him early to play defensive tackle. And so you might not have a better option, and that makes sense. But it's just a guy you have to kind of grin and bear it with. But if you're in a shallow league and you have a better option, then you absolutely go with it.
Now, any corners on Atlanta we should start, being that the pass-happy offense?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, the friggin' Bucks they were slinging the ball around the yard there, and the guy in particular didn't get the press after the game, but was Chris Godwin with a 30% target share. Yep. Anthony Brown got the press because he had the big play, but he was playing against – I'm sorry, did I say Anthony Brown? Antonio Brown was the wide receiver playing Anthony Brown, the cornerback, and Anthony Brown, the cornerback, is not as good as Antonio Brown, and he got eaten up. But Chris Godwin in the slot is eating up targets. He's a guy that's going to be seeing a lot of Isaiah Oliver. Oliver as a slot defender is interesting for a couple of reasons. He's not a full-time player, so there's a little risk there, but he plays most of the snaps. But what's interesting is that Dean Pees' defense uses the slot defender to attack offenses, meaning that he will blitz, meaning that he will be there in run support, meaning he will be there to do more than just cover guys. And simply by virtue of covering Godwin with the 14 targets he seems almost certain to get, lots of tackle opportunities. He also is a candidate to get some pressure on the quarterback. And now, is he going to sack Brady? Yeah, not a lot likely, but if Brady's going to get sacked, it's going to be by a surprise and not by a coverage sack. So I think he's pretty interesting. He's a guy that I've been watching all preseason to see what comes of him. And if you're in a deeper league where you're starting quarterbacks, then he's a guy to keep an eye on. And this week, here's a week where you might use him because he's got Godwin.
Fantastic. Now, speaking of Philly, they are being visited by the Niners this week. We discussed Greenlaw earlier. But are there any players in this matchup on either side that you feel strongly about?
Philadelphia and San Francisco. San Francisco is a team that they really try to minimize big negative plays, and their offense did a good job against that with the Lions. And people think, oh well, it's just the Lions. The Lions have good pass rushers in Trey Flowers and Romeo Okwara. And so if I'm out there looking at the Philly pass rush, and the Philly pass rush looked effective against Atlanta last week, but I don't think it'll look as effective against San Francisco this week. And a guy that worries me, a guy that I've liked for a long time, is Brandon Graham. And Brandon Graham's snap count is just slowly coming down year over year. He's down around half the snaps now. He made a big play against Atlanta, but that was the one play that he made. And so he's just out there. He's a rotational guy now, which makes me sad because he's such a good player, but he's a bit long in the tooth. And I think we'll see a lot of rotation from Philly, and they'll try to keep guys fresh to get after San Francisco, but San Francisco just doesn't give up a lot of bad plays. And so I would be sitting Brandon Graham. Now, on the flip side of that, there's interesting plays because of the way the style of plays that these teams play. So we talked a little bit about Dre Greenlaw earlier. Well, the linebackers in particular in San Francisco, so it'll be Warner, obviously, is a set it and forget it starter, but Aziz Al-Shayr is a decent start out there because he's facing a lot of tight ends and running backs. The Gainwell was involved last week. Yes. You got two tight ends in Ertz and Goddard that play a lot. So you got to like their linebackers. And then for the same reason, you play Jaquiski Tartt. A lot of people don't know who that is or have forgotten about Jaquiski Tartt. But over the last couple of years, the 49ers have been playing a lot of quarters and a lot of too high safeties, and the safeties haven't been very useful for IDP. That's shifted a little bit this year. They have a new defensive coordinator, and they're showing more of a disparity in how they deploy their safeties. And Jimmy Ward is the free safety. He's a converted cornerback. He's not frequenting the box. Jaquiski Tartt is. And he's the guy that's down in there with the run stop opportunities. He's the guy that's more likely to be looking at Goddard and Ertz. And so he's an interesting start for me. So that's a guy I'm looking at on. And finally, the Philadelphia linebacker, Eric Wilson, is the one full-time linebacker in Philadelphia. And that was a question all offseason. Is he right. Is it him? Is it Singleton? Is it both? The answer we now have seen is Wilson. Wilson's out there calling the plays. He's the 100% player. And he's out there against another offense that uses their running backs and tight ends a lot with Kittle and whoever they decide to throw at us from running back position, Trey Sermon or Elijah Mitchell. There will be tackle opportunities.
Well, I think we covered most of the start sits that we wanted to. Is there anybody else you want to mention as anybody we skipped, either as a sit or a must start?
I think we got it pretty well. There's a few others out there that are pretty interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, which I thought was just an interesting aside. I ran into an article talking about the fact that Chido Awuzie, who's a cornerback for the Bengals, and he's out there. Trey Waynes is hurt, so Awuzie is going to have to be the guy. He's got to probably face Allen Robinson. Awuzie is the only guy that's one of the few guys in the NFL is probably really big enough to even take on Allen Robinson even of any physical standpoint at all. I read that Chido Awuzie was in Colorado, their buff backer, like their Joker, their Star, their Sam, their money backer, which I thought was real interesting because more recently a guy named Davion Taylor was their buff backer. And it's just interesting that Awuzie is a cornerback and Davion Taylor is in the league as a linebacker. I got a commissioner who thinks he's an edge defender, but it just goes to show you how amorphic the middle of those defenses are anymore. I thought it was just a fascinating lesson. It's just in the interchangeability of players in the middle of a defense, right? You got deep safeties, D-line, edges, cornerbacks, and that leaves basically 3 players in the middle of the defense that have to do so many different things. And I thought that was just a fascinating lesson that I've learned in the last couple of weeks about what we think of in terms of positions and roles, and what we think of as a linebacker, and what we think of as a strong safety, and what we think of as a star or a joker, all have such thin gray lines between them. And so Awuzie just stood out to me is that he's going to see a lot of Allen Robinson, and that makes him a start. But just that lesson just stood out to me as just an interesting lesson that we ought to be watching it in NFL terms. And it also goes back to the point of Jalen Ramsey. I had mentioned him early in the show. Yep. He had 9 tackles. He was tied for the lead among all cornerbacks in total tackles. And he was out there covering tight ends and facing Jimmy Graham. And he's being used in a different way this year, which is really interesting. I just think watching NFL defenses evolve like that and seeing how players in the middle of the defense operate is fascinating.
Yeah, especially for a while, we saw defenses getting smaller at the linebacker position. And just to see that full transition now happen where you see – guys who were DBs in college becoming linebackers. And then, like you said, these new joker positions with like Jamal Adams, Jalen Ramsey, these guys who are taking snaps at, outside of just the defensive backfield. It's fantastic. I like to see the innovation that's happening.
We got one question here in the chat that we missed, the comments box. We got a Black Mitch Wilson. There's the man in the comment box, and he asked John New or Eli Mitchell on the flex spot.
Ooh.
Not. It's an IOP question. I don't mind IOP questions. I tell you, man, I got it. Assuming that's Elijah Mitchell, the running back from San Francisco. That's a man. You can't deny that upstate. It could be Shanahanigans again, but man, I got Mitchell all day. John New. That's one thing that people don't talk enough about is tight ends, and people think of tight ends a tight end. There are 2 different tight end roles in the NFL. One is more of the downfield, the receiver type guy, the guy that's either in line or splitting out. And then the other is the H-back type that can line up in the backfield and do other things. Jonnu is the latter. That player is a low leverage play in terms of play-by-play. That means he's got to be like Kittle and just pile up yak in order to be a useful fantasy asset. He's not getting those high leverage downfield targets. And so I've seen a lot of hype over John New on the Bird app, and I just don't get it. And I'm still taking Henry over him, and that's probably an ice cold take at this point, but I don't care.
That would be a cold take. John New was peppered with targets, though. I know they're not downfield, but if you're in a PPR league, I just don't trust Shanahan. Like all offseason, all I kept hearing was nobody should like Trey Sermon because they don't have a starter. They're just going to rotate. Eli Mitchell suddenly gets a couple carries, and everybody's like, he's going to be the starter now. I think he's going to face a lot of the same issues that anybody else does, and I wouldn't count Trey Sermon out.
I agree. Yeah, the issue of the hot hand is that the hand can be hot for a game or 3. And it can be great for a while, and you just don't know when it's going to cool off in game. But for folks out there playing the 0 RB thing, I mean, you got to start that guy if you got it.
Yeah, if you were lucky enough to pick him up later, get him off the waiver wire, especially with people spending 90% of their fab on Eli Mitchell this week,
right?
You got to start him if you signed him for that much. All right. Well, you can find Tripp at Dynasty Tripp on Twitter. And his work is on dynastyfootballfactory.com. Tripp, any final thoughts for the crowd?
Man, I'm happy to see football back. It's awesome to be back talking football with you, JJ. Had a great pod. Just the 2 of us knocking it out, man. Good times.
Good times. I missed Gary, but I have to say we had some fun tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm at JJ Wenner on Twitter. Thank you, Tripp. Thank you to Gary for setting this all up for me. Thank you to everybody for tuning out there and for sending us questions. Make sure you tune in to our Tuesday edition hosted by Craig and the crew. Don't forget to subscribe for a chance to win a Gridiron Ratings Playbook. And remember, your path to the title starts with Gridiron Ratings. Have a great night.